art of friction where imagination meets reality and words paint 1,000 pictures. You must be guessing what the session is by now. Now I request the panel to come for the next session, which is the art of fiction, for which I would really like to call upon stage the amazing panel that we have today. Aruna Chakravarti, author and translator. Shantanu Ray Chaudhuri, Chief Editor, Om Books International. Please come on the stage and grace it.
Thank you all so much for being here today. Thanks to PVLF for having us at the session today. That little bit there where Arunadi held my hand and we walked up, that's literally the author holding the editor's hand and sort of coming on stage. She has been holding my hand for almost 15 years now, I think, from the first time I published with her. It's been a long association. I was privileged. Aruna has of course been one of our foremost translators. Rabindranath Tagore, Sarat Chandra Chatterjee, Sunil Gangopadhyay. She's translated all these names and won the Sahitya Academy Award for translation also. I was privileged to come with her, come on board as an editor on her first novel, Inheritors, and subsequently on two path-breaking novels called Jorasako and Daughters of Jorasako, which were period pieces covering the women of the Tagore family, and then other translated works by Sunil Gangopadhyay. And very recently, only last August, we came out with this book, which is Through a Looking Glass, first collection of short stories, and a wonderful collection that brings together, which has a theme running through it of women sort of caught in the cusp of modernity and tradition. And a lot of us will be familiar with the kind of stuff, kind of experiences these women have. So thank you all. Thank you, Arunadi, for agreeing to do this. And the session is the art of fiction, storytelling. What is, according to you, a primary requisite of getting started or mastering this art? Going
ahead. Good afternoon, friends. Thanks for attending this session. I hope we are able to give you a good session and that you enjoy it. Answering Shantanu's question, I feel that what really needs to be what really is a requisite for writing fiction is the need to share something very, very personal and something very, very important to you with your readers. You see, a lot of people write books for the wrong reasons. They want to become writers. They just want to be known as writers. They want to win awards, and which is all very well. But my advice to people who are starting out to write is that write only if you have something extremely, extremely important to you, which you wish to share. An experience, something that you really wish to talk about. Don't write for the sake of writing. Don't never write for the sake of writing. Now, when you write a novel or when you write fiction, there are certain, like one writes always from one's experience. And my writing, particularly the short stories, are all derived from my experience as a child. Some memories, maybe a face, maybe a sentence I heard somewhere, some little conversation between older people, which were not meant for my ears, but which entered my ears. So, and which I had forgotten also for years and years and years. Suddenly it comes back, and that becomes the starting point. And gradually the story evolves, it takes shape, the imagination comes in, other experiences come in, and that's how a story is written. Where my novels are concerned, of course, as you know, they are mostly historical novels. So there's a lot of research to be done. And then the research part of it, I mean, this is really the most important part, that you collect a lot of material, but then you are tempted, because you've done all this hard work, you're tempted to put it all into the book. The most important thing is to decide what to keep and what to put aside. And then gradually, when you get the backbone, you get the basic structure of whatever you are going to write about, like the Tagore women, or the Mendicant Prince, which is about the Prince of Bhaval. So then after that, when you pick out the basic facts that you want to present, gradually the imagination starts, you reconstruct that history. You know, it's an imaginative reconstruction of history. So I think the requisites for good writing fiction is the ability to imagine, and also the ability to take that which is most salient in your experience, and sort of concentrate on those.
It's a very interesting point that you made about writing. In fact, only yesterday, I think somebody shared with me this thing about Harper Lee saying that there are those who write and there are those who must write, and it's the latter who are actually the writers.
Absolutely, yes.
So, you know, as you mentioned, a lot of these short stories originated from certain personal experience, a memory of a face, a place. But, you know, and we all know I get a lot of submissions where from young people about a novel that talks about their lives. You know, like the first novel is almost always, you know, I can make out from a submission that this is the first novel, and it's actually, the author is actually talking about his or her own life so far, which is supposed to be very interesting. And in some cases they are. With you, Inheritors wasn't any of that, you know, like it was a, do you think, how did Inheritors come about, and do you think because you started writing fiction very late in the day, you could weed out the intensely personal aspects and present a very different world with your work of fiction?
That's a very interesting question, Shantanu, and I'd love to talk about it. You probably know that I was a translator for many years of my life. Actually, I was a juvenile writer. I used to write prolifically as a child, but then something happened, and for about 25 years there was no output, no creative output. I did do academic writing, and then I rediscovered the joy of creative writing through through translation. So I used to translate. I did about 5 or 6 books with Penguin, as you know, and then my writer, Sunil Gangopadhyay, whose books, Those Days in First Light, I translated, he advised me to, not advised, but he sort of asked me, he said, what makes you just translate? Why don't you write? So why don't you do your own writing? So I told him, look, I used to write as a child, but then there's been such a long gap that I don't think I can, you know, recover that, the kind of creative inspiration that I had. And he said, no, I think you're mistaken. Once a writer, always a writer. And so just start, make a beginning, and you'll be able to do it after some time. So I took I didn't take his advice. I kept, procrastinating. Okay, yeah, I will sometime. But then what happened was, something very interesting happened. You know, after I got my Sahitya Academy Award, I was interviewed by Desh Patrika. And the young man who was interviewing me, his last question was, will you just go on translating, or will you ever write anything of your own? So I didn't want to give him a negative answer. So I said, no, maybe sometime I will write something of my own. And then he said, he asked me, will it be poetry? So I said, no, most likely it'll be some kind of, some novel or short stories or something. And then he said, then what will the subject matter be? And that is exactly what I told him. that first novels are always autobiographical, but I don't think I deserve. I mean, anybody would want to read about me, my life. So possibly I'll write about my ancestors. And what happened was that when the issue came out, the last sentence of the interview was, the summing up was, Aruna Chakravarti's next project is a novel about her ancestors. So then I was just forced to. And then what happens is, because Desh is such a well-known journal and all Bengalis subscribe to it, I started getting so many phone calls and messages about, oh, how wonderful, now you're writing, particularly from my sisters, my siblings, my cousins, and with questions like, will my mother come into it? Will I come into it? And so on. And so then I was just forced to write The Inheritors. So that is how it happened.
Were you ever daunted? The Inheritors, as it's quite a big book in terms of, and the world that it covers is very alien to the general reader, that the English-speaking reader in India. You went into the whole tradition of what a Kulin Brahman is and all of that. Mm-hmm. Were there any, for one, getting it published, like we are very closed in our, in accepting certain genres of writing, even in fiction, so one, that aspect of getting through to a publisher and who's willing to, and the bigger aspect of the kind of world you were creating and how will it resonate with it? Was that ever a daunting aspect?
See, frankly, Shantanu, I got into it because of this, people literally hounding me to write. And while I was writing it, I was enjoying the process, but very frankly, I thought nobody would publish the book. And even if it was published, nobody would read it. But, I was really pleasantly surprised when Penguin agreed to publish it. And even more surprised when it was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Award. Now, the second part of your question, that is that alien world and how it, how it would resonate. These worries were there, these anxieties were there. But then, with me, it's always what I want to do, what I want to write, I write. I don't think of the response. That never worries me. Like, what will people think? Will people like it? And if they don't, and I never change my subject matter or my style of writing to suit any readership. Yeah. I feel I'm a writer. This is the way I write. Take it or leave it. If people like my books, well and good. If they don't, they don't. Once you're a writer and your books are out in the public domain, I think you should be ready for any criticism or any lack of interest, just as you are ready for interest and appreciation. So that was that. Another thing was that, when you are writing about your own family, sometimes you're not very sure about, how much to say and how much to hold back, because it's a very personal, very subjective kind of a process that you're going through. Now, in my case, my family, my paternal ancestors, they were all, as you read the book, they were all Sanskrit scholars from the 17th century onwards. And they were extremely poor, as scholars were in those days. My great-grandfather was one of the pandits who helped Kali Prashanna Singho write his Mahabharata. Yeah. So, he was appointed by Vidyasagar. He was introduced to Kali Prashanna Singho by Vidyasagar as a young Pundit, but extremely knowledgeable. So I have this, I'm from that line. And although they were desperately poor, they were, they had a lot of problems in life. And they were also eccentric, as you know. Many of them were, some even went mad, as you know, from The Inheritors. Yeah. But I have never felt that I should keep back these facts, because I'm proud of my lineage. I feel that they bore their poverty with pride, and whatever, they were bordering on genius. And so geniuses are often eccentric. There's no need for me to hide these facts. So I've always been I've been totally open with the way I've described my family.
Yeah. It's quite a fascinating world that inheritors created, and despite being a Bengali, so much of it, like your ancestors, like some of my, in the maternal side, were Sanskrit scholars who wore their poverty as much with as much pride as they wore their pride in their learning. Like they were the kind who could
Yes,
actually be
yes,
very
absolutely.
dismissive about
Yes,
people,
yes,
and
yes.
and
Very
uh,
true.
so it's a fascinating world. And from there on, the next works that you have done, and you've created quite a niche in that particular thing, are these period pieces where you take on Tagore and the women. Like all of us know about Tagore as being this huge influential poet, artist. Everything that Indian culture is about is informed by Tagore. how how did that aspect, how did the women of the family come to excite your imagination? And instead of doing a non-fiction, it's matter for a great non-fiction narrative also, the women but you go the fiction way. Or the Mendicant Prince, for example, the Bhawal Sannyasi case, another fascinating case which has got a tremendous non-fiction narrative already there. How do you fiction, what are the calls that you take when you're fictionalizing these worlds?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, is what interested me and what made me write about the women of the Tagore household. You see, from childhood, we Bengalis have been taught to treat the Tagores as almost deities. We almost deifying the Tagore, Rabindranath. His father, his grandfather, his brothers, they were all outstanding men, who heralded the Bengal Renaissance and were very, very largely instrumental in bringing about the national movement. So they were great figures. And we were told about them ad nauseum. We were constantly being told about, all these people, and plus other luminaries like Rammohn Roy and Bengalis, Rammohn Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and so on. But even as a child, I suppose I must have been very, very gender sensitive. And I used to ask my father that why is it that you never speak about the women of Bengal? Didn't they contribute anything at all? And my father, of course, was politically very correct and said, yes, of course they did, we had Sarojini Naidu and Toru Dotto, but it was always a sense of, like they were also Rans, and that somehow peeved me. And I had decided as a child that when I grow up, I'll find out about the women of Bengal and I will write about them. But then, of course, so much water flowed under the bridge and so many things happened and I didn't get around to do it till quite late. After my retirement, I thought that, look, this is the time. If I want to do it, then this is the time. After this, it'll get too late. And that's when I started researching, and I found that there were so many women who had contributed so greatly, and yet their light was, totally shadowed by the men. And I thought the men were really hogging the space, hogging the limelight, and kind of keeping the women sidelined. And there were so many, like, the first lady doctor of India is a Bengali.
Yes. First novelist was
Tagore's own sister. So there were so many important people. And then I started thinking about them, reading about them, and then I found there were so many, it's not possible to write about all of them. So I have to, narrow down my focus, and gradually I zoomed in on the Tagore women. But there, I originally thought I would write a proper biography, write proper biographies or one biography. But what I found was that there was hardly any material. You see, there are reams and reams and reams on Rabindranath, Dwarkanath, Devendranath, even Jyotirindranath and all these others, but there was hardly anything on the women. So then it was impossible to write a full-scale biographical study of one or even two. It was just not, there wasn't enough material, because all that I had were a few sentences, from Tagore's own biography, a reference to his Major Wodi, to his sister, to his mother, just one-line reference here and there, and bits and pieces. And of course, the Tagores ran a journal. They had a family journal called Bharati, in which even the women wrote. But the women, since it was a journal, their own family journal, whatever they wrote small monographs, a few pages, autobiographical, Amar Jibon, Amar Bibaho, Amar, this, that. And, but the thing is that it seemed to me that they were not being open at all. They were just being very politically correct. They were all saying, how lucky they were to be married into this wonderful family and how everything was so wonderful. Their father-in-law was such a great saint and sage. Their, mother-in-law was such a wonderful woman. Sisters-in-law were like sisters. So they were just being very correct. And I found that there was no material with which I could build a proper authentic biography. And so I had to fall back on my imagination, which I love doing. And so that's how these two novels were written. As for the second book, these two, fourth book that you talked about, The Prince of Bhaval, there again, I was sort of requested by some members, some friends of mine, who were relatives of the Bhaval family.
Could you just, I'm not sure whether all of us here know about the Bhaval case, which is a fact. Why don't you just narrate give a...
So you see, this is actually a real authentic historical case, a legal case. There's a zamindari in East Bengal, now Bangladesh, called Bhaval. It was a huge zamindari, a huge estate, almost akin to a kingdom. And the zamindars were designated Raja by the British. Now, what happened was there were three princes who had equally inherited, because there was no law of primogeniture in Bengal, in India, in fact. So the second prince had fallen ill and had been sent to Darjeeling for a rest, a little to recoup his health. And apparently he died there. Allegedly, he died and was cremated. But 12 years later, a sannyasi, an ascetic, appeared in the capital of Bhaval, Jaidepur, and claimed that he was the prince who had allegedly, met his death. And so there was a case. He in fact, the British had taken over the estate because the other two princes had died in the meantime. And the British didn't naturally want to hand it over to him. And so they, even though his family and all the subjects recognized him, and then it took him 10 years to, lodge a case and demand his rights.
Went on for, I think, over 30 years, wasn't
16 years. 16 years. Okay. It started in 1930.
46.
And it went through the district court, Dhaka, then the High Court, Kolkata, and then the Privy Council. The Privy Council verdict. And the sannyasi won the case. In all three.
He won the case and died the next day,
and
isn't it?
And died in 2 days, 2 days later. So this was the case. This was the story. And so some relatives of the Bhavals kept urging me that you've written 2 family histories, so why don't you write another one? This is very interesting. I agreed that it was interesting. But then what I thought was that, look, all the facts are in the public domain. What can I contribute that will be new? What excuse do I have to write the story all over again? And then it struck me that I could write a novel. And the story, again, coming back to my gender bias, I told the story through the voices of the women. All the queens, the 3 queens, then the 3 sisters of the prince, then some of the subjects, the prince's mistress. So it's the women who are telling this story. And because everyone was impacted by what happened. So in telling the story, they tell bits of it. And in telling their part of whatever they're saying, they also reveal their own characteristics, their own temperaments, their backgrounds, their interpersonal relationships. So it all, bit by bit, it kind of fits in and becomes one story. So that's
and that
the
also
way.
lends itself very well to this narrative, because you are dealing with almost a sort of whodunit genre, like it's an investigative piece.
Yes, yes. Yes, it's definitely because the case was not, it was not about whether it was a murder or whatever. It was really about whether this man's identity.
The identity.
It was the identity. So the mystery is still there because, I have given all the other characters a voice, but I haven't given the prince a voice. Because if I had allowed him to speak, then the whole story would be right in front of you. So I didn't want to demystify the Bhaval prince. And so that's how the story was written, the novel was written.
Arunadi, going back, I'll just come to two aspects before we close the discussion, two aspects that I think we need to talk. But before that, for the Tagore stories, for the two Tagore novels, Jorasako and Daughters of Jorasako, what were the kind of, who were the women who really fascinated you and you wanted to, and you gave them, apart from Kadambari, who has quite a bit of a writing done on her because of her association with Tagore in a way. Not many of us know that Gyanoda Nandini was probably India's first fashionista, before that term even came into being. So what were, or their mother, or Tagore's mother and grandmother, and, somebody like Tagore treating his daughters in a way that you wouldn't expect Tagore to be treating. So could you just give us some insight about how you developed those?
You see, as I started researching and thinking and imagining and, everything else that goes on when in a writer's mind, I felt that these women, that the whole Tagore household was glamorous and glittering on the surface, so much wealth, so much education, such a fantastic family, what good looks, and everything was fantastic about them. But I found that it was very, very dark and very, very gloomy within. Somewhere in the what they call the Oborod or the Zanana, I found a lot of gloom and a lot of sadness, bitterness. And the thing is that the women obviously were the ones who were in the Oborod, who were, and their life was made even doubly miserable because they were educated. You see, Devendranath had this strange belief that all women should receive an education. So his daughters and daughters-in-law were educated, but he didn't believe in giving them any freedom. He felt that education is fine, you read your books, you learn to read and write, that's all very well, but you remain in the Oborod. So what I felt was that these women were they were in a double problem. They experienced freedom, they understood what freedom was, but weren't allowed to experience it. So that made them rather very complex beings. They had a lot of frustrations and miseries, and which other women who have lived in the Oborod for generations, they don't even know because they're mindless. They just accept their fate. Now these women could not do that. And that's why there were all these strange, like Kadambari goes through all those strange dreams and fantasies, and she's sickly herself, she's sick in body, she's sick in mind, and altogether there's this difficulty, the dichotomy of pretending that you are okay when you're not actually okay. So, so all these things I thought was fascinating. And I found that these Tagore men who have been deified to this extent were deeply flawed human beings. I realized that. So that was what, so there are different kinds of women. Gyanoda Nandini, whom nobody had ever heard of, was actually the first modern woman in India. You know, the first woman who was educated, who was independent enough to travel to England alone with her children. She visited the Governor General. You know, she attended his soiree or whatever, all alone by herself. And in many ways, she was the one who first introduced the idea of a nuclear family. So, I mean, that kind of a woman, yet no one knows her. No one, even Bengalis haven't really, not many Bengalis even have heard of her. But Kadamburi, as you said, people do because they have these associations that she had, that there was some relationship between her and Rabindranath. But Ganodhar Nandini, nobody knew of. And even Kadamburi, nobody really knew her as, you know, in her weakest form. I mean, for her, she was just one of the beaux, one of the daughters-in-law whom Rabindranath liked, and then they made up all these speculated on the relationship, for which there is really not much data. So this was why I found each character different. Like Devendranath's wife, Sharuda, it was that typical Sati Savitri, Shoti Savitri kind of woman who followed her husband's footsteps. Ganodhar Nandini was a very dynamic.
Dwarkanath's wife was a character.
Dwarkanath's wife was a fantastic woman. I mean, she was married at the age of 5. And her husband was one of the lions of, he was lionized even by the British. And she had the guts to tell him, because he used to throw huge parties and, have...
meat and alcohol.
He used to eat meat and alcohol and entertain the British and all that. She told him that you have moved away from the ways of our family, from the traditions of our family, and therefore you will... So she actually barred him entry into Jodashanku. And the strange thing is he obeyed her. He actually kept away. He stayed in another house. He used to come from time to time to find out, if anything was required. But she just kept him away. She sent for the Pandits and asked them that what is the duty of a Hindu woman whose husband has sort of left the moral ground, so to speak. And they were so shocked because they never thought that any woman could ask such a question. And their answer was, well, as a Hindu woman, of course, you should... you shouldn't, keep him at a distance. Obviously, that don't sleep with him, but take care of him. Do everything that is necessary. Serve him as your Lord and Master, because he is your Lord and Master. But if don't sleep with him. And she did that. She followed that.
In fact, he was banished to the Bagan Badi, or an
yeah.
outhouse in the... It's a fascinating story, and the way Arunadi tells it is like, it's conjures a whole world for you. A couple of final questions. We're running out of time, but no discussion with you can be complete without talking about the process of translation. Entirely different from actually writing fiction. Just a brief, what are the struggles you do talk about? What are the pitfalls of translating? And you have translated lions of literature.
Well, with translation, the main thing is, it's a kind of tightrope walk. On the one hand, you have to be faithful to your text. You have to, the voice of the author should be heard. Like if I translate Rabindranath and make him sound like Salman Rushdie, then I'm obviously, it might be a very good translation, but the voice, the tonality of the author should come in. And so that is one thing, being fidelity. Being faithful to the text and to the author is one part of it. But on the other hand, if you are too obsessed with fidelity, and you lose the work becomes unaesthetic. Sometimes people are they translate. They're so they're so close to the text that they do a very literal translation, and then that becomes very it's jarring, and particularly people. After all, why does one translate? One translates for readers from other cultures, from other languages, so. If they feel alienated, if they feel that this is something that is jarring, I mean, no, not quite. I mean, it's sort of disturbing. It's not really reading like a creative work. Then I think the translation fails. So basically, the translator's main problem is to do this balancing act. No translation is perfect, but the better the balance, the better the translation. Now, this is what I have always tried to do. So, and I have sometimes maybe erred on one side or on the other side, but I think my translations have been accepted by English-speaking readers, even by actual Europeans, and who they haven't been alienated. The language has not alienated
actually
them.
told you that your novels read like translations and your translations read like original novels, isn't that?
Yes. Because, and even Shunil Gangopadhyay once said that, I had a belief that only people whose mother tongue is English can translate, are good translators in English. But now after reading Aruna's translations, I believe that those who have the potential, who have a creative potential, they need not actually be creative writers, but they have the potential to do creative writing. They can be good translators, because a translation should read like a creative writing. It should not read like a translation. So that is one thing. But sometimes one gets stuck. One doesn't know how to translate. Like you might get stuck for one word. And I'll give you one example. Like in my first translation of Tagore, there was this song, Asha Jawar Pother Dhare Keteche Din. Now, in that, there was one word, udashin. There was this word udashin. Now, for udashin, I just couldn't find an equivalent. I did the entire translation, but that one word, just, I just couldn't find a word for it. It could be indifferent, it could be casual, it could be a philosophical. I don't know, there are so many different aspects, but nothing was really fitting that particular, that part of the text. It's actually, Rabindranath, what he's saying is that, that I have walked on this path, for so many, all my life, but to whom shall I leave behind this lute, this lyre that rings in my soul? And then he says that fragments of song shall be scattered, all over. You may find them in this, you may find them in this, you may find them in all this. And then finally he says that, কিছু বাকন চৈত্র মাসে বকুল ঢাকা বনের ঘাসে মনের কথার টুকরো আমার কুড়িয়ে পাবে কোন উদাসীন. That maybe some person will find a little fragment of what I'm thinking, of the song that I'm singing. The song obviously means his thoughts, his beliefs. So, and I just couldn't find a word for udashin. Then suddenly, I just abandoned the poem. I said, I can't do it. And then suddenly, an image flashed, of a baul. And for people who don't understand baul, it's a baul is a wandering minstrel. And Rabindranath, their philosophy is that you are part of life and yet outside it. You're like a swan that may swim on foul waters, but the feathers remain untouched. So that is their philosophy. And Rabindranath was extremely attracted to this baul philosophy. So I just got this image of a baul, strumming his ektara and walking around, walking down a little path. And there are trees on either side, and there are flowers which have fallen. And then he stoops and picks up something and then goes again. And so I translated that last bit. Um, and, um, and in fragrant March, when the grass in the wood is covered with bokul flowers, a wandering minstrel perchance may find a fragment of a word. So this is how you have to make do with when you get stuck with a particular word which is untranslatable. You have to translate the thought, the spirit behind.
Thank you so much, Arunadi. We could go on and on, there are so many other questions, but I think we're running out of time. I think with an author like you, the world of imagination lives on, and we have had so much conversation of late where we are told that fiction is dead, which means imagination is dead. Thank you for proving them wrong, and I do hope you and I will work on more books in the coming years. Thank you so much, and thank you all of you.
Thank you, Shantanu, and thank you, audience.
What a session it was. And first of all, Aruna ma'am, I have a few words to say to you. The session felt like a storytelling session. So when I was a little girl and I used to go to my grandmother and she always used to tell me stories, it just felt that way. Thank you so much for making me relive the memory that was lost in past times. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. So moving forward for the felicitation session, I would like to call upon stage Mr. Andre Breed, Managing Director, Nielsen's Book Data. Please, sir, come on the stage.